Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, September 29th, 2023. The conclusion of another week. Haha. See, I was going to say time for the start of another show, but it's actually time for the conclusion of another week. And the weeks are flying by. And this was a little bit of a weird one. And yes, we'll start, I guess, with the announcement of the news just breaking for those of us on the East Coast, and well, it's just breaking for everybody, I guess. Senator Dianne Feinstein, 90 years old, has died, and I can't say it's unexpected at this point. She'd certainly been in ill health for some time, and it seemed pretty clear that she intended to remain in office until the end. And so she has. And so, like I say, it's not unexpected. I am certain that the governor of California has been anticipating this for quite some time and is probably about as prepared as you can be for an event like that. And today, I guess, they'll be rolling out all of the pre-written biographies about all of the amazing things that she did during her career, and we'll focus on those things. I mean, we won't focus on those things necessarily. We'll focus on the fact that, okay, it happened. You know it already. We have to acknowledge it, and we'll keep a stiff upper lip about it and gaze towards California longingly, I guess, and then wonder about who will be replacing her in the Senate and when we're going to find out. That's sort of the nature of the beast on that one. Interesting note on it, though, this morning from Justice saying he was actually, is this right? Were you present for her swearing in as mayor right at the ceremony? That is pretty interesting itself as well. So I didn't know that about you, Justice, and that sounds, yeah. So on hand for that historic moment. So, well, that's always interesting. It's always nice to find out little things like that about everybody. At any rate, yes, there's not much to say about it other than, yeah, really, obviously, I think it's been anticipated for some time. And now all the glowing biographies will come out. And we were discussing it in the house just briefly before air and saying, well, it was too bad we went through that period at the end there where she really wasn't functioning all that well and didn't really take any advice about whether or not she should perhaps, well, at the very minimum, give herself a break. But clearly she loved doing what she was doing, and, well, nothing major, awful, horrific happened as a result, I don't think. And now we'll all be reminded of all of the good things and the firsts along the way, and I don't think it does a tremendous disservice to her legacy at this point. And I think it's reparable with all of the glowing biographies that will be printed about her in the next day or two. So be on the lookout for all of those. If you are interested, and pick them up and by all means comb through the history. We have other things to comb through today. And as usual, more of it than we actually have time to do. ProPublica, it seems, is dedicated to the proposition of ruining every Friday or something like that. They are continuing to do too much good work. Cut it out, you guys. Examining issues related to the Supreme Court and all federal courts. No additional shoe to drop about Clarence Thomas specifically this week. But we're behind on reading about the allegations that they have investigated in depth. This week's entry, and I'm not at all clear about whether or not they're intentionally doing this on a weekly basis or every Friday, or they may be pushing it, just pushing their staff to keep the flow going. So there may be some conscious scheduling here. But another installment in, whether they consider this to be part of the same series or not, I do. This time, ProPublica publishing We Don't Talk About Leonard. It's Leonard Leo. And we talk about Leonard, but we only talk about Leonard when they and other investigative outlets put together something in this format, and we can share it and discuss what it means along the way. Andrea Bernstein, Andy Kroll, and Ilya Maritz, which I think is a different team than is on the Clarence Thomas specific work. But I'm certain they're in consultation with one another. We don't talk about Leonard. They do. Leonard Leo is the subject, and it's not even gigantic and huge today. So maybe they've done us a favor. Although it's foreshadowing. Every Saturday, I guess, or every Friday, we'll be doing this. This is part 1 or episode 1 of a long, I'm sure, long-running series. I don't know how many parts there are. Does it say? Maybe, but no, I guess not. But in fact, I think they've cut it incredibly short and probably could have put 2 or 3 parts in here, but I guess they're looking to stretch it out. But this is, they'll be doing podcasts about this. I see. This is what okay. Now I see why they're going to stretch this stuff out. This is just a summary, I guess, of the podcast itself. The podcast is 50 minutes long, and we can't just steal their podcast and play it, as much as I'd like to do that. Although, I guess if I had really thought about it, I could have arranged for it and taken Friday off. I'm very jealous of the old Daily Show schedule. I really should have implemented that. But in that case, we'll just pitch their podcast, which you should listen to after you're done listening to this podcast and donating money to this podcast. Because if you go to that podcast, they'll also ask you to donate money. And they're doing like really actual good investigative work. And you might give all the money to them instead. So don't do that. Stay here and give your money here. And then when you run out of money, go listen to ProPublica's podcast and say, oh, I only wish I had saved more of that. But it's gone now. So we'll just have to, I don't know. Anyway, and then you can go out and run a lemonade stand and give them the proceeds. So this is what you can expect from installment number 1. They kick the thing off here with they have a nice illustration done of Leonard Leo peeking out from behind the Federalist Society curtain, essentially here. The conservative legal movement in the United States is more powerful than ever. One largely unknown man, well known to you and I, has played a significant role in pushing the American judiciary to the right, Leonard Leo. And then they do a whole podcast. There's probably some music, right? You know, whatever the hell else you want to throw in there. And then they say, this is We Don't Talk About Leonard, a podcast series with WNYC's On the Media that explores the web of money, influence, and power behind the conservative takeover America's courts and the man at the center of it all, Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo is coming out from behind the curtain, and so it looks like he should be playing the Tonight Show. I'm stealing the federal judiciary. Historians and legal experts say there is no comparable figure in American jurisprudence. To the extent Leo is known, it's for his role helping to install the conservative supermajority in the U.S. Supreme Court, but his reach extends far beyond that. Decades ago, he realized it was not enough to have justices on his side. Those jurists needed to decide the right cases, brought by the right lawyers and heard by the right lower court judges. He built a machine to do just that. And it's described in episode 1, which they have titled Most Likely to Succeed, and during which they travel from Leo's modest roots in middle-class New Jersey to a mansion in Maine where last year he hosted a lavish party with federal judges that fell on the night before the Supreme Court decision had overturned Roe v. Wade. What a party. Anyway, it must have been something, and wonderful, I am sure. We'll reveal all about Leonard Leo, and should be really interesting, and hopefully there'll be a print version of the story to match so that we can share it without just outright stealing their podcast. Okay, well that gives us a bit of a break. I was a little bit worried that they were going to cost us an hour and a half of the show reading another one of their magnum, what's the plural, opus? Magnum opus? But reading another magnum opus, perhaps. But no, they have read it to you over the course of 50 minutes. And so that saves us a lot of time. Let's see. Other things that I have on tap. Just a short news item. I'm sort of working my way through what got stored in Pocket, and I didn't put it in any particular order. But this is news on the legal front from the former guys, the battery of charges facing the former guy. A decision in Georgia not to try to remove Trump's own trial to federal court. That's interesting. Not certain what the logic is actually, but they lay it on thick in the motion anyway. Zach Schoenfeld reports this for The Hill, and it tells us that former President Trump won't try to move his Georgia criminal prosecution to federal court, his lawyer said Thursday. And I guess the guy didn't get fired and replaced by someone who said that they would today, or at least hasn't made the news yet. The surprising turn of events comes weeks after Steve Sadow, I'm not certain how he pronounces his name, S-A-D-O-W, that's Trump's attorney. We said yesterday in talking with Greg that, he has the same rotating battery of like 5 attorneys. When it comes to long-term representation, yes, although many of them are being disbarred or are on trial themselves, he actually has, it seems to me, a cast of thousands when it comes to attorneys. Not all of them are particularly close to him. Some of them have been brought in at the last minute because the attorneys that he ordinarily would have used are in, federal prison or whatever. But he has I think, a rather large cast of attorneys. But there are a few names we hear repeatedly. And yesterday we were talking about Christopher Kise being one of them. This guy I haven't seen anywhere else so far as I know. But Steve Sadow, Trump's attorney, notified the state judge that Trump may attempt such a move previously, weeks ago. But now, and here's where he lays it on for the judge. I mean, it's starting to look like we know it's not going to work, so we'll try this thing instead. Quote, President Trump, which, by the way, there are some judges that are like, yeah, if you're going to keep using the term, you should put former president in there. Although, as an honorific, of lots of other former presidents, just everybody has continued referring to them as President Clinton, President Obama, et cetera, et cetera. But most of them were only impeached once, if at all. So to me, I think maybe that should be the rule. If you're impeached a second time, they stop calling you president after you're out of office. Now, I realize they may come up with a second baseless impeachment for Biden, but, I'll get over it. Anyway, President, supposedly, Trump, now notifies the court, and he capitalizes court, which is something you ordinarily at law school practice is. You capitalize court when you're talking about the court, Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. Not even the state Supreme Courts get the same sort of capitalization. Same thing with the people who serve on it, too, the justices. It's kind of a weird practice. Anyway, certainly a state trial court doesn't ordinarily get capitalized, but you know how Trump is with capitalization. So President Trump now notifies the court that he will not, and he actually does, capitalize every letter N-O-T in this, which I don't know if that's good protocol for court filings either. But anyway, President Trump now notifies the court that he will not be seeking to remove his case to federal court. Sadow wrote in court filings Thursday, quote, the decision is based on his well-founded confidence that this honorable court, capital H, capital C, intends to fully, completely, and there's no comma there for some reason, fully, completely protect his constitutional right to a fair trial and guarantee him due process of law throughout the prosecution of his case in the Superior Court of Fulton County, Georgia. Unquote. Gee, thanks. I don't know. Is he trying to butter up the judge so that I don't know? He gets is that what he's trying to butter him up and he'll give me a break or something? It doesn't really work that way, but maybe he figured everybody's been antagonizing this judge by trying to remove their cases to federal court. And maybe at some level that's insulting to the judge, and we're going to go the other way. I don't know. Won't do anything. But anyhow, Gee whiz, thanks for the vote of confidence. 5 of Trump's 18 co-defendants are actively trying to move their charges, though they face an uphill battle. Some legal experts believe the entire case would still be moved if any one of them is ultimately successful. Maybe. Moving courts would have provided Trump, of course, a pathway to try to assert immunity from the charges, though it would not have made them subject to a presidential pardon. It would have also broadened the jury pool to other areas of Georgia that are less heavily Democratic than deep blue Fulton County, and meant a federal judge would oversee the case. Recording of federal court proceedings is also prohibited, but by remaining in state court, Trump's trial is poised to be televised. That might be what actually motivates him to do it. I want to be on television. Anyway, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis charged Trump. Did you know this? Charged Trump and 18 others last month in a racketeering indictment. Over their efforts to overturn the 2020 election result in Georgia. They have all pleaded not guilty. Anything else that I need to see here? Not really. Well, let's see. Trump's filing Thursday came just before the deadline on whether to attempt this move. Sorry, I laugh because I left out the part. It's a process known as removal. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, and 3 individuals who signed documents purporting to be Georgia's valid presidential electors, I like the way that's put, have all tried to move their charges. Other defendants could still file such a request at the last minute, which I guess is coming soon. Willis has opposed each of the removals, making the disputes one of the early legal battles in the case. So far, none of the defendants have emerged victorious. A federal judge rejected Meadows' attempt and could rule on the other 4 defendants' requests at any time. Panic. A legal battle is likely to be resolved on appeal, however, with Meadows having already begun the process with the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. The dispute turns on whether the defendants can show they are federal officials. The allegations against them are within the scope of their office, and they can show a plausible federal defense. If successful, the defendants then plan to try to assert constitutional immunity from prosecution. Before Thursday's update, Maddow, Trump's attorney, reportedly had attended court hearings at which the other defendants made their case for moving the charges. He needed some cliff notes on how to do it. Trump faces 3 other criminal indictments, as you know. In federal court, he faces charges over his post-2020 election efforts and his handling of classified documents. In state court in New York, he faces indictment on connection with 2016 hush money payments. Trump is attempting to move that case to federal court and is now appealing after a judge rejected his request. And he pleads not guilty to all charges. Okay. The rest of that was not exactly news, but, someone went through the trouble of typing it. And so I felt perhaps we should share it. Okay. Something I didn't get to share yesterday, but which Joan made me aware of. And now I'll share with you because it's still in the news. And because early in the week, on Tuesday, when Joan visited with us, she hinted very strongly that this was coming. It's just that they weren't sure of the day of the week that it was going to come out. And the answer is now Wednesday, except that now today is Friday. So you see I'm a little bit behind on this. And the word of the day, which was Wednesday, is that Daily Kos will be calling, or did call, on Bob Menendez to resign, joining 800 million other people apparently, and endorses for Senate Andy Kim, who has declared his candidacy to replace Bob Menendez. That's for New Jersey political watchers, probably Andy Kim wasn't tops on their list, but I mean in terms of guesses about who would run, but he may make an excellent replacement in the sense that, they're really looking for somebody who's going to be pretty stable and not a showboat. And I think that Andy Kim probably fits the bill on this. It's just in New Jersey, a Senate seat like that, ordinarily they'd be looking, I think probably at this point, be looking for a South Jersey-based power broker, ordinarily, to hang on to that seat. Where is Andy Kim from? New Jersey's not a huge state geographically, but they really do. There is a real divide between North and South Jersey. despite the fact that, like I said, it's pretty small, and it's not like southern New Jersey is so, geographically isolated from northern Jersey, but it is very different. Northern New Jersey, very much a part of the New York media market. Southern New Jersey, very much a part of the Philadelphia media market. And indeed, Andy Kim, representing the 3rd District, looks like he's down south and sort of born and raised down there too, a graduate of Cherry Hill, New Jersey High School, Cherry Hill East High School. And so, he's got his roots there. And the other seat being held by Cory Booker of Newark. It's been some time since South Jersey had a representative in the Senate. So, not surprising there. And actually, northern New Jersey has kind of dominated the Senate races because that's where the bulk of the population is, I guess. But at any rate, there was always a southern New Jersey power center, but he was usually sitting in the House or maybe sometimes in the state legislature, sometimes dominated by a southern New Jersey, very often a machine politician. Anyway, interesting entry written by Marcos himself, just making the pitch here, and I thought I might share some of that with you, and maybe it gives you a little background on who Andy Kim is and why he was of interest to Marcos and the rest of the crew at Daily Kos. They are proud to call on New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez to resign. How do you like that? Proud to do it. And endorse Andy Kim as his massive upgrade of a replacement. Personally, Marcos writes, I am absolutely livid at Menendez and his clan's mendacious efforts to weaponize his immigrant background as a shield for corruption. And I can't think of a better outcome than Senator Andy Kim. And while we're at it, I'm hoping for a primary challenge to Menendez's, nepo, as in nepotism, baby congressman's son, Rob. I feel bad about that because I actually knew Menendez's kids when they were kind of little. But then it's also ridiculous for me to think of them as being in Congress. And being his daughter, Alicia, a very, successful journalist as well. It's just weird because they were little kids when I knew them. But I don't know. It's not nearly as strange to see them as journalists as it is to see them in Congress. Anyway, it's time to clear out that endemic corruption from all of Congress. Well, you got a lot more work to do than just Menendez, but okay. Menendez, he goes on to say, has a history of corruption as well as a history of evading accountability. There was, of course, the first federal indictment a few years back. As such, it required breathtaking arrogance to engage in a new round of alleged corruption while knowing that the FBI was keeping an eye on him. But we see it time and again, like with Donald Trump. If people repeatedly get away with criminal behavior, they somehow think they are immune. By now, you are likely aware of the new indictment alleging behavior so breathtakingly brash, it is unbelievable that Menendez hasn't already resigned in shame. Where are we borrowing this from? Previous, I guess from previous Daily Kos coverage of it. The indictment said Menendez used his clout to interfere in 3 criminal cases. Pressured U.S. agriculture regulators to protect an associate's business interests and used his position as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee to influence U.S. policy on Egypt. Prosecutors say he met with Egyptian military and intelligence officials, passed along non-public information about employees at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. That seems very unwise. And Ghost wrote a letter on behalf of Egypt asking his Senate colleagues to release a hold on $300 million worth of aid. Federal agents who searched his home in 2022 found more than $480,000 in cash stuffed into envelopes and hidden in clothing, closets, and a safe, and gold bars worth more than $100,000. Prosecutors said another $70,000 was discovered inside his wife's safety deposit box, they said. And imagine the interest he was missing out on. Really unbelievable. Now back to the current article. The indictment states that after a trip to Egypt in 2021, or October 2021, Menendez literally Googled, how much is 1 kilo of gold worth? I'm curious myself. He now claims that the $480,000 he stashed in his house was for emergencies, and that for 30 years I have withdrawn thousands of dollars in cash from my personal savings account, which I kept for emergencies, and because of my history of my family facing confiscation in Cuba, which he doesn't remember because he was born in New York, of course, but whatever. It's of interest. And as Joan pointed out, I think on the air, or maybe it was during one of the breaks, but I think so, that, well, if he was withdrawing cash for 30 plus years and hiding it around the house, some of that, all the cash that was photographed has the little security threads in it, which is a recent development. 30-year-old cash stored around the house, although maybe he rotated his cash to keep it fresh, would not have had that. Anyway, Cuba. Marcos writes, and therein lies the crux of Menendez's defense. You see, he's supposedly being targeted because he comes from an immigrant family. His son, first-term Representative Rob Menendez, has weaponized his family's immigrant heritage to try and justify his father's history of corruption. In my life, I have seen countless detractors who refuse to believe a son of immigrants from Hudson County could rise to be one of the 100, and yet he's constantly proven them wrong, the younger Menendez said in a statement, and thankfully those who know him and what he has stood for in his entire career outnumber the naysayers, except not anymore, I guess. Anyway, Marcos notes here, immigrants face enough challenges already. They don't need this corruption associated with them. It's gross and unseemly. No one refuses to believe that Menendez could be a senator. He's been a senator since 2006. Rob himself has ridden the nepotism wave all the way to Congress. To sit there and cry that this federal indictment stems from some kind of persecution because they're from an immigrant family is absurd. The elder Menendez was born in New York City. How many generations get to claim I'm a poor downtrodden immigrant as a shield for their wrongdoing? Well, the answer here should be none.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were in the middle of reading Marcos's endorsement of the call for Bob Menendez to resign, and an endorsement for Andy Kim to replace him in the Senate, and we were just about to get to that part. Marcos unhappy with the idea of Menendez and family using immigrant status to try to shield them from wrongdoing, or their own wrongdoing. Shield their own wrongdoing from the rest of us, I guess. Yes, by virtue of his parents, Bob Menendez lived the immigrant experience, but that is utterly irrelevant to him now stashing gold bars in his home as compensation for his alleged corruption. And then goes on to say, you know who isn't using his immigrant experience to justify corruption? Representative Andy Kim. Of course, he hasn't been accused of any corruption yet, I don't think, but I guess if he does, I'm not certain that he would never use his immigrant status, but he hasn't done it for now. So that's, I guess, supposed to be good news. Kim is the son of immigrant parents who managed to instill real immigrant values, Marcos says. Dedication, hard work, integrity, and service to his nation. He graduated from the University of Chicago, a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, where he met and became friends with current Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Working at the State Department, he was a civilian advisor to Generals David Petraeus. Not great, but we give everybody a pass on things like that because I worked for Bob Menendez, and, well, so I'm interested in such things. But also to General John R. Allen in Afghanistan before serving on President Barack Obama's National Security Council. He unseated a Republican in his first run for Congress in 2018, despite a racist onslaught designed to other him, as reported by NewJersey.com and excerpted below, in which it describes an ad featuring a photo of several whole fish on ice with the caption, "There's something real fishy about Andy Kim," but the real fishy, those two words, and Andy Kim are spelled out. You got to see it, really, which it's not here, but I can imagine it. This is a good description. They're spelled out in a type font that a Democratic spokeswoman said is called chop suey and is often associated with Chinese food stores or Asian films, those sort of, slashy or bamboo-y kind of, I don't know, but the broad brushstrokes kind of thing to make it look a little bit like Chinese character writing. Anyway, so I guess you can see where that's coming from. Anyway, the GOP or GOP's decision to show images of raw fish and to use this particular red block font, which is actually called chop suey, and it's part of the quote here. They repeat themselves, and has long been used to visually convey Asian heritage, makes it abundantly clear what this mailer is, a shameful racist attack on a qualified and capable public servant, said Caitlin Mota, a Democratic Party spokeswoman. So that throwback for those of you as background here. Now, despite the typical Republican racism, Kim narrowly beat the Republican incumbent 50-49. Incumbents rarely lose. In 2020, he won re-election 53-45 as President Joe Biden was narrowly losing, in his district, and an amazing 8-point overperformance. In 2022, in a redrawn district, he won by 12% against a self-funded Republican foe. So that's pretty interesting. And let's see, embedded here is a tweet from New Jersey political operator David Wildstein saying, "You could not have made," or quoting somebody else here, but at any rate, "you could not have a better example of how differently Andy Kim's mind works than other politicians. He didn't hire a pollster or gauge potential support. When he sees a problem, his impulse is to spring into action and help clean it up." What are they talking about here? Well, it gets explained in just a moment here. In January 6th, 2021, Kim went viral for getting on his knees to clean up the post-insurrection Capitol Rotunda. Do you remember that? Ah, yeah, now I do, right? One of those photos appears at the top of this endorsement, so if you want to take a look online and refresh your memory here, NBC News covered the behind-the-scenes of that moment, writing thus, "When Kim finally did walk around the rotunda, his favorite and arguably the most storied room of the building, the disarray left him speechless. Water bottles, broken furniture, tattered Trump flags, and pieces of body armor and clothing were strewn on the marble floor as if it were just an abandoned parking lot." I don't know how often I see body armor abandoned in parking lots, but okay. "It was just overwhelmed. I was just overwhelmed with emotion," Kim, then 38, told NBC Asian America. I didn't even realize there was such an outlet. "It's a room that I love so much. It's the heart of the Capitol, literally the heart of this country. It pained me so much to see it in this kind of condition." So for the next hour and a half, he crouched down and filled a half-dozen trash bags with debris. When he finished cleaning up the rotunda, he began working on the adjacent rooms, including the National Statuary Hall and the Capitol Crypt downstairs. Then he returned to the House floor to debate Pennsylvania's vote count, a session that lasted until 3 a.m. By Thursday evening, he'd been awake for more than 36 hours. Back to Marcos. Many of you know that I, too, have lived the immigrant experience with my family. My father was born in Greece, and my mother is from El Salvador. When I was born in Chicago, my family moved to El Salvador early in my life. I didn't return to the U.S. until I was 9 years old, when we had to flee because of the Civil War. My experience was easier than most. I was a U.S. citizen and my parents had legal status, so I didn't have to worry about anyone in my family being deported. But I spoke little English, was bullied as an outsider, and had to assimilate into an alien culture. All of that was hard enough, but I also saw my parents work hard and build what they had and ensure that my brother and I had every possible chance to succeed in life. They sacrificed in ways I didn't recognize until decades later, like paying for 2 newspaper subscriptions to satisfy my voracious reading appetite. I didn't realize how much of a financial challenge paying for even a single subscription posed for them, and they loved this country like few native-born Americans can appreciate, including the MAGA a-holes performatively humping their American flags, literally so, for Trump, thinking it triggers liberals. That, in a nutshell, is what being an immigrant means. We are here not because we had the privilege to be born in America, although I'm an anomaly, and I was. We are here because we want to be here, because we appreciate what this country offers, and because we know what the alternative looks like. And that is a two-way relationship. America gives us so much, and we as immigrants in turn owe the country the very best of us, including deep appreciation, hard work, and impeccable integrity. As an immigrant and as a Latino, not me, but him, I am deeply embarrassed by Senator Bob Menendez. He is a disgrace and he needs to be gone. The legal process can play out, but we know who and what he is. He doesn't deserve to be in the Senate, and his Nepo baby doesn't deserve to be in the House. Kim, on the other hand, shows us the best of what immigration adds to America and is a lovely person to boot. How do you like that? Here also embedded is another tweet from Populism Updates reading, "So Menendez is about to be replaced by one of the most wholesome dudes in politics." Itself embedding an Andy Kim tweet of him posing with his, it looks like 2 sons. One of them is blocked by the smaller of 2 large boxes of Star Wars Legos that they are displaying. And he writes, "My wife wasn't thrilled when I put this Lego Millennium Falcon on our wedding registry." To not seem completely self-indulgent, I told her I'd wait until we had kids to build it. Today, after 10 patient years, the adventure begins. Well, that's a lot of patience. He, Marco says, is a credit to the House. He'll be a credit to the Senate. I'm beyond excited for Daily Kos to endorse him. In a Senate chamber where integrity is often in short supply, Kim will be a treasure. And an all too rare Asian American in the upper echelons of American government as well. So that'll be nice. I add that as a side comment. Just wanted to read through that and let you know a little bit about how Marcos is feeling about Andy Kim, in case you didn't know anything about him. A reminder that he was the guy that helped clean up the rotunda, plus all the other thoughts that Marcos has had on him. So give you some context from which to start considering whether he is the most apt replacement. All right, let's see. Other things that I have in store for you. Now might be a good time to finally fulfill the pledge to catch up with Rosalyn MacGregor and her latest on what's happening in Ottawa County. Do I have the correct thing queued up here? I think so. Let me get to, I can get to the, I will provide you with the articles upon which her installment is based, but let's take a 5-minute break then and let Rosalyn update us on the latest from her corner of Michigan.
Good morning, David. I'd like to bring your listeners up to date on the governance of the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners. You may recall the group of MAGA radicals swept the board and have been creating chaos since January. They even got the attention of the Associated Press. Joey Capoletti sums up their actions with an article titled, "Opponents of COVID Restrictions Took Over a Michigan County. They Want Deep Cuts to Health Funding." The new fiscal year starts October 1st, and the budget adoption process is in high gear. County Chair Joe Moss originally asked, quote, overqualified, unquote, County Administrator John Gibbs for a 63% cut to the county's health department's budget. The idea was to reduce the county's contribution to the health department from a budget of $6.4 million to $2.5 million. So the illegally fired health director took to social media saying the cuts would effectively shutter the department. Quote, It's hard to believe that the budget cut isn't retaliatory, both for frustration at COVID actions that they don't agree with and not being able to remove me for a political appointee, she told the Associated Press, unquote. Listeners may recall that the Ottawa County Board wanted to hire an HVAC business owner to run the health department. Local public health officials say the potential loss of funding could severely impact several essential services, including vaccines, cancer screening, and testing for sexually transmitted infections. Hundreds of people rallied outside of the health department in support of the health department after the warnings, which Gibbs and Moss have called media theatrics. A national public health expert said the situation is unique in the U.S. and a threat to the entire public health field, especially going into an election year when health officials and their department could again become political targets. Of the hundreds, maybe thousands of public health officials who were fired during the pandemic, I'm trying to find a single example where they've retaliated against the entire department like this, said Lori Freeman, the executive director of the National Association of County and City Health Officials. I'm hoping this isn't the start of a new trend of retroactive punishment against public health departments. Freeman said her organization is keeping a close eye on Ottawa County. Quote, this isn't something we want on the books for other county commissioners to consider in the future, end quote. Under the current proposal, a family planning program that also provides things like cancer screening for those without insurance would see its budget reduced by 40%. Money that goes towards STI testing would be cut by 44%, and a mobile dental health clinic that goes to places like schools and jails would lose nearly 20% of its funding. County Chair Moss told the AP in an email that no other department saw other similar cost increases in the past several years, quote, nor did they respond to the pandemic in the same way the health department did, unquote. He added he supports, quote, public health efforts that respect constitutional freedoms and parental rights, unquote. Quote, essentially, I'm wondering, as the manager, how do we say suicide prevention is or isn't more important than food access? Lisa Ugansky, the county health department's health planning and promotion manager, asked the county board Tuesday. Or substance abuse prevention is or isn't more important than making sure people have access to education about what might be causing chronic diseases, Ugansky added. What might be causing communicable diseases in the community, unquote. The health department's health education and nutrition wellness budget finances multiple programs such as suicide prevention efforts, substance use disorder prevention services, food safety classes for restaurants, and programs around fitness and nutrition. It also funds the department's involvement in Healthy Ottawa, a collaboration with local hospitals and healthcare organizations, and a full-time coordinator for Ottawa Food, which is a collaboration aimed at ensuring community members have access to healthy, local, and affordable food. Quote, my concern is with Ottawa Food, unquote, said County Commissioner Rebecca Curran. Especially with inflation being so high, the cost of food being absolutely outrageous, clearly this is going to be a need in our community. And I, for one, want to make sure that we do have a coordinator in place to help with that program, even if that's where the funding goes, unquote. This is an example of single-subject fanaticism having a real-life effect on the 300,000 residents of Ottawa County, Michigan. Don't like being asked to wear a mask to spare your neighbors from serious illness? Get elected and cut the funding of the local restaurant food inspectors or drug addiction services. So that's my time for today. This is Rosalyn MacGregor signing off. Back to you, David.
Why, thank you very much, Rosalyn. So, yes, I'm glad we were able to finally get this in. I've been holding on to this one for a little while and meant to get it in last Friday. Always good to know what's going on there. It's a crazy situation and a microcosm, really, for everything. It's the new bellwether for MAGA crazy, I guess, and pays to take some time and pay some attention there. So it's probably about time for the next update, too. I didn't even check. It's probably in my email waiting for me right now, or will be shortly. But thank you for keeping us up to date. Let's see, other things that I wanted to try and sneak in. I don't know what else we can get in before the top of the hour break, but I've got some thoughts about where to go for out of the ordinary stories, let's say, that we like to use Fridays for. Let's see. I feel like, I had some other items I wanted about a week ago to use, or however many days ago, when the judge in the New York fraud trial, the civil lawsuit brought by the Attorney General in New York, issued his ruling. And I think we went over that pretty thoroughly and discussed sort of the whys and wherefores of how the judge came down in this. But for now, I can't recall, and I'm going to take a look quickly at what I had put aside from Steve Bannon. I had put aside that he had tweeted something about, he really set up his piece saying it takes a special kind of person to be, caught up in fraudulent universities, fraudulent charities, and now to be found that your entire business empire also turns out to be a fraud too. Basically making, a pretty broad and good and solid point about Donald Trump. It won't change the way he's viewed by most of his fans, but I had this feeling in the back of my mind that this relatively short piece that he put up at the Maddow blog might be worth spending a few minutes on. With brutal court ruling, Trump's legal troubles reach new heights. Let's see, just to remind everybody what's at stake here. Donald Trump has now been caught overseeing a fraudulent charity, a fraudulent university, and a business that repeatedly committed fraud. Steve puts it all this way. Donald Trump's university, of course, proved to be a fraudulent operation during his White House tenure. The Republican was required to pay $25 million to his former, quote, students, a first-of-its-kind payment for a sitting American president. Also, while in office, Trump's charitable foundation proved to be a fraudulent operation, which was forced to close its doors and which led to a $2 million judgment after the evidence showed he repeatedly misused the ostensible charity for his own interests. Completing the trifecta, a New York judge ruled that Trump's business also committed repeated acts of fraud over the course of several years. NBC News summarized its findings this way. According to the ruling, which allows the civil trial to begin next week, and that's coming up, it's actually next week, Trump lied to banks and insurers, both by overvaluing and undervaluing his assets when it was to his benefit, while exaggerating his net worth to the tune of billions of dollars. In his 35-page ruling, Judge Arthur Engoron said Trump continually lied on his financial statements and was able to get favorable loan terms and lower insurance premiums as a result. Trump's legal arguments defending his statements are based in a fantasy world, not the real world, Engoron wrote. The report added that the ruling would dissolve numerous limited liability companies, or LLCs, associated with Trump, including the Trump Organization, LLC. That's a pretty big one. An entity that's been used to expand the Trump brand through the use of his name. Where he leases his name to buildings built by, chiefly, as it turns out, by Russian swindlers. Anyway, and just lends his name out in exchange for payment. And that's his most frequent business model these days. Well, this seems like a good time to pause and take stock of the scope of the former president's legal troubles. You kind of know what they are, but just to run them down quickly. Trump's business, charitable foundation, and university were all found to have committed fraud. He's facing criminal charges over his alleged post-defeat crimes, federal criminal charges over classified document handling. Trump is facing classified documents theft, not just handling. Trump is facing criminal charges in New York over the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, the porn star. Trump is facing criminal charges in Georgia over alleged post-defeat crimes, held liable for sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll, and a judge recently concluded that the former president, for all intents and purposes, raped her, as many people commonly understand the word rape. Trump is also facing several civil lawsuits filed by police officers injured during the January 6th attacks, and despite all this, the former president is the frontrunner for the Republican Party's 2024 nomination, leading his next closest rival by roughly 40 points. So, just in case you had lost the focus on all of this, Steve Bannon reminds you of just what a shambles the Republican Party actually is. All right, let's see. There was, we touched on it only briefly, but perhaps we'll touch on it briefly again and use Newsweek to rolled up Newsweek to touch it. But it does perhaps deserve another poke. Anyway, did Donald Trump break the law with a gun purchase? A video raises questions. Andrew Stanton wrote this up for Newsweek. We kind of glossed over exactly what it was that we saw in the thing and focused mostly on the fact that it was Donald Trump's face engraved on the grip of this Glock pistol. But yes, it certainly would likely break both state and federal law for someone actively under indictment to make a gun purchase. And so now they're trying to obscure the facts. Did he in fact buy it? Did he in fact receive it? Did he pay for it? You know, when Donald Trump buys something, that doesn't always mean he pays, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know what? Now that I think about it, we did name the statutes right down to the number and the use of, as Greg told us, the weird squiggly S thing, or the Silk Row. But anyway, by way of background and more organized thoughts on it, video appearing to show former President Donald Trump buy a firearm during a South Carolina campaign stop raised questions about the legality of the purchase Monday afternoon. Trump, who is running in the Republican presidential primary, I don't know if you knew that, has been indicted for separate criminal cases, 2 federal cases. You know all about what they are, of course. The former president, a supporter of gun rights, stopped by a gun shop in Summerville, South Carolina, a critical early voting state in the primary, on Monday, just hours before delivering remarks at a campaign rally. Video posted to Twitter showed Trump appear to purchase a firearm, but you never know what's being staged. Trump spokesperson Steve Chung wrote in a now deleted post that Trump purchased the firearm, but told Newsweek he did not purchase the gun. How do you like? I just for that alone, it's really is worth repeating the story. I bought a gun. I did not buy a gun. Essentially, oh, I'm in trouble. I didn't buy that gun. He wrote in a statement, President Trump did not purchase or take possession of the firearm. He simply indicated that he wanted one. Well, you can't always get what you want. And sometimes when you do get what you want, you go to jail for getting it. I want to buy one, Trump said in the video after a salesman showed off a Glock, describing it as a great seller. The video, and they don't show why. It's because it's got his face on it. The video quickly went viral on social media, with many people questioning whether the purchase was legal due to his indictments. Newsweek reached out to the Trump campaign for comment via email. Donald Trump is under felony criminal indictment and thus cannot legally own or purchase a gun, posted political commentator and Trump critic Brian Tyler Cohen. And possession, that poses a different problem entirely because, well, gee whiz, he's got a lot of properties where he could be hiding those guns. Federal law does prohibit most individuals indicted on felony charges from purchasing a firearm, but the constitutionality of that law remains in question following a court ruling against it last year. That law was overturned, allegedly, by U.S. District Judge David Counts, a Trump-appointed judge in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas in September 2022. In his ruling, Counts determined that the landmark Supreme Court decision from earlier that year means that they can no longer balance away a constitutional right in the case of Jose Gomez Quiroz, a man who was charged under the ban, according to Reuters. Former federal prosecutor Naama Ramani told Newsweek on Monday that the ruling may not be binding in South Carolina, but is ripe for Supreme Court review. A district judge's ruling in Texas won't be binding in South Carolina, both because it's not an appellate court and it's not in the same circuit. But this is the type of case that may end up in the Supreme Court. The Department of Justice said it will appeal, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Texas, is Second Amendment friendly, he said. He continued, it recently held that a federal statute prohibiting marijuana users from possessing firearms is unconstitutional. That ruling by a conservative court may, ironically, help Hunter Biden in his addict in possession case. Decisions like these on constitutional grounds, which result in a circuit split, and inconsistencies are ripe for Supreme Court review, so this is the type of decision that may not be binding now, but it will be if the justices affirm. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals includes Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and is viewed as the most conservative, one of the most conservative circuits in the country, certainly the craziest. South Carolina is in the Fourth Circuit, so that includes, by the way, also North Carolina, my own Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. So you see what they're saying here? It might not be binding on the Fourth Circuit, even if it's upheld in the Fifth Circuit, and it could create a split in the circuits, which is the kind of thing that ordinarily moves the Supreme Court to say, we don't like to let splits in the circuit hang out there, especially on something important. We'll take it up and we'll rule on it. And then, I don't know, we'll see what the hell they come up with and how they differentiate it from Hunter Biden's case so that they can continue to prosecute him but let everybody else go so long as they are Trumpy enough. Okay, let's see, just a minute or two remaining before we have to make our way out for the top of the hour. What else can we, I guess I will make mention of it because we can keep it short. We don't really need to dive too far into it, but I did see that, I guess was it maybe even over the last weekend that, when everybody was, up in arms about things, interviewing Republicans and Joe Manchin because they were big mad about the change in the informal rules about dress code in the Senate, making way for Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania to dress in his preferred mode, and how it was a big break with tradition. And by the way, apparently Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney maybe teamed up to try to reimpose, and in fact, I think successfully did reimpose the dress code, whether or not anybody's going to enforce it and how they can enforce it against, well, especially against someone like Fetterman, who I guess could just, as they say, clobber you and eat you. But at any rate, people actually seriously debated the dress code for a little while, and I thought that was a dumb waste of time. But even dumber is, who did this? Was it Kathleen Parker? Is that the name of the person we're concerned with here? Tweeting over the weekend and writing over the weekend, say what you want about Donald Trump. At least he knows how to dress. Famously does not actually know how to dress. Weird. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, I found where I had stored this away, but it's actually a screenshot from Twitter where the Washington Post Opinions account was promoting Kathleen Parker's piece with the quote, "As little as I have loved Republicans the past few years, coinciding with the rise of our own little autocrat, at least Donald Trump knows how to dress," said Kathleen Parker. Now, taken to task over this article for a number of reasons, some of which, most of which, all of which are more substantive than the one I'm going to pick on, just to spend a minute or two on it. I thought I could get it in before the break, didn't finish it up. But yeah, the idea that, well, say what you want about Donald Trump, at least he knows how to dress. Like I said, famously, no. Of course, I think most egregious would be his trip to England where he appeared in white tie in a way that was just ludicrous. And I don't know, I guess they're, insisting that he knew better how to dress formally in white tie and tails than the experts there who, literally do nothing other for a living than help people meet protocol demands in state dinners and the like in the UK. And he overruled them all in insisting that he wear a waistcoat of clownish proportions. I know nothing about that mode of dress, and had to take all my cues from the experts that they interviewed afterwards. But it was clear from the picture, like, well, there's something wrong with that. That doesn't look right. One, he looks ridiculous, but two, there's something weird about it. And then they showed, this is, how much of the various garments are supposed to be showing. And he fought them tooth and nail saying, I want more of this stupid white, I Is it the waistcoat? And do they say west? I don't know. They probably pronounce it weird. Anyway, that whole incident was by itself ludicrous. But then right here in the good old US of A, he's not really, I mean, he's like the least sharp dresser in the White House in decades. And I guess what I really wanted to say is, the idea that at least he knows how to dress. Well, you mean he wears suits? Yeah, that's true. What he knows is, that you're supposed to wear one of these, costumes to look like a serious businessman. But of course, he has his own demands about the way things, should work. He's, significantly overweight, and so he's trying to disguise it. And the way to disguise it is to have really good, high-quality tailoring done so that your suit fits your body decently. His idea is to buy bigger and bigger articles of clothing, and I guess he doesn't want to pay for tailoring or whatever. And then, of course, his invention of the ultra-long, super-long, poorly tied tie that makes it look like his body isn't as gigantic because the tie is gigantic, and it makes it look like he's in proportion, but he's not. And then, of course, I mean, how you could say about someone, well, at least he knows how to dress, someone who, because he tied his ties so weird to disguise the fact that he was overweight, would then hold the I don't know what you call the butt end of the tie, if there is such a word for it, but in order to hold things together, ordinarily, if you tie the tie at the right length, you have enough on the back end, the tail end of it there, to tuck it into the little, if you want to keep them from flapping in two different directions when you're in the wind, you can tuck it into the little label sewn to the back of the tie, and that holds the two things together. And then if you're looking for a way to keep it from both ends of the tie of blowing together in unison, blowing at all, you could get a tie tack or a tie bar or whatever to keep things down. But he was holding those two pieces together, and he had to because they were uneven because he was tying his tie wrong. But he would hold those two pieces together with Scotch tape. There's probably no way to look like you know less how to dress. I can't come up with a dumber way of doing it. Anyway, between that and the baggy, oversized khakis that he would wear when golfing, and pull them up over his belly, the old man trick to try and hide some of it. It was ridiculous. And his oversized pants, his suit pants were oversized and wrinkled. It was horrific. He's not a sharp dresser. And the idea, well, that'll be the knock. At least he knew how to dress. Yeah, famously not the case. So rather pathetic for Kathleen Parker to try to lean on that one. But you knew that. I just thought I would say it. Now we enter the 10 o'clock hour. And I've got a couple of things here that I've been holding on to that I thought might be of interest to add to the mix and that are not straight up traditional daily political stories. Let's see. One that has less to do with politics than the other, I guess. So I'll start with the one that's maybe a little bit more traditionally in our wheelhouse, and which I'm a little bit more familiar with because I did read through this article and found it fascinating. The other one, I think, I know only from skimming it and is a little more tenuous. So let's start with this one. It's from the New York Times, so don't hate it automatically. It's actually quite interesting. An opinion piece from the New York Times I'm willingly reading to you by Katie Engelhardt. It is noted here, a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, and who has written extensively on dementia and aging. And it's really fascinating. And there's a political element to it, and a political science element to it, and a sociological element to it. This is interesting. So as she says, and this is the headline, says, I've reported on dementia for years. We now know this. And one image of a prisoner keeps haunting me. And it's very interesting art accompanying this, credited, by the way, to, as always, but this time to Cecilia Karlstedt, the artist. We rarely credit the photographers and artists that go along with these pieces, but it's a very poignant little illustration that goes with it. Check this out. This is a really fascinating article. I'm going to read through the whole thing because it's Friday. At Federal Medical Center Devens, that's the way it's styled, Federal Medical Center Devens, a federal prison in Massachusetts, there is a prisoner who thinks he is a warden. I'm the boss. I'm going to fire you. Victor Orena, who is 89, will tell the prison staff. On some days, Mr. Orena is studiously aloof, as if he were simply too busy or important to deal with anybody else. On other days, he orders everyone around in an overwrought mafioso tone, which is probably how he landed there. A version of the voice that perhaps he used when he was a working New York City mob boss decades ago, browbeating members of his notorious crime family. This makes the real prison warden laugh. On a recent morning, Mr. Orena sat in his wheelchair beside a man with bloodshot eyes. I asked them if they knew where they were. This is a prison, Mr. Orena said brightly. Why are you here? I asked. I don't remember, he frowned. I don't know. Well, interesting, right? Raises some questions. Timothy Doherty, a senior officer specialist at FMC Devens, which houses federal prisoners who require medical care, estimates that 90% of the men he oversees don't know what they did. Some of them don't even know where they are. Mr. Doherty helps run the Memory Disorder Unit, the federal prison system's first purpose-built facility for incarcerated people with Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. It's interesting, like you forget that you will need that eventually, and that there's a political element to that, in some cases, not necessarily for these guys, but, in some cases, over-incarceration, longer sentences than necessary, federal mandatory life imprisonment requirements in our tough-on-crime bids, etc., all resulting in this. Down the hall from where Mr. Orena was sitting, past the activity room with the fish tank, where a cluster of men were watching King Kong on TV, there is a cell belonging to another man who wakes every day to discover anew that he is in prison. Some mornings, the man packs up his belongings and waits at the door. He explains that his mother is coming to get him. She sure is, a staff member might say, before slowly leading him back to his cell. In recent years, I have reported on many aspects of life with dementia. One image has especially haunted me, that of a prisoner who, as a result of cognitive impairment, no longer remembers his crimes, but is still being punished for them. We don't know exactly how many people in American prisons have dementia, because nobody's counting. By some estimates, there are already thousands, most of them languishing in the general inmate population. Older adults represent one of the fastest growing demographic groups within American correctional facilities. Between 1999 and 2016, the number of prisoners over 55 increased by 280%, according to a report by the Pew Charitable Trusts. Over the same period, the number of incarcerated younger people grew by just 3%. This trend is largely attributed to tough-on-crime reforms in the 1980s and 1990s, which lengthened sentences and ensured that many more people would grow old and frail and then die behind prison walls. Incarcerated life is also thought to accelerate the aging process, such that many long-time prisoners appear more than a decade older than their chronological ages and are considered elderly at 50 or 55. Early on, a prisoner's dementia might go unnoticed. Federal prisons do not routinely screen older people for Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia unless they exhibit symptoms. And the rigidity and monotony of institutional life can often mask them. A person can get by for a while just by following the man ahead of him. Interesting. Easy to understand, right? But later, things will start to fall apart. At first, a person with dementia might struggle in the normal way that other aging prisoners do, to walk long distances for meals or medication, to get up from a low-lying toilet without a handrail, to climb a bunk bed on command. right? Lights out, everybody up, right? Okay. Over time, he might start to pace or repeat phrases over and over. He might have hallucinations or delusions or paranoia. He might fall. He might be incorrectly medicated by a doctor who does not understand his condition. He might struggle to distinguish between items of a similar color, mashed potatoes on a white plate, say, and so have trouble eating or forget to eat at all. A prisoner with dementia might wear slippers outside his cell, even though that is against the rules, or wander somewhere that he's not supposed to go. He might have trouble judging the distance between things, or bump into people who might, in turn, this is prison, mistake the stumbles for deliberate affronts. He might begin to smell because he can't remember how to wash his body. And he might expose his body to others because the disease leaves him sexually disinhibited. I didn't really think about that as a symptom of it, but I guess true, linked here in case you want to read about it. He might get hurt by another prisoner who takes advantage of his impairment and then forget that he was hurt. He might hurt someone else. He might become incontinent. He might grow afraid of shadows because he perceives them to be holes in the ground. Eventually, the man will find himself living inside an unyielding system whose boundaries and principles he can no longer see or interpret or remember. Because he can't stop breaking the rules, he might be punished, in some cases with solitary housing. There, his condition might worsen. Non-compliance with correctional rules and directions is often treated as a disciplinary issue rather than a medical issue, explains a 2022 report, Persons Living with Dementia in the Criminal Legal System, co-published by the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging. But because the prisoner has nowhere else to go, he might muddle along as best he can until he becomes so impaired that he is transferred to a medical center where he will spend the rest of his incarcerated days lying in bed. The Memory Disorder Unit at FMC Devens, which opened in 2019 and was designed to resemble a memory care facility, offers an alternative path for such a prisoner. Its correctional officers have received training from the National Council of Certified Dementia Practitioners and currently supervise around 24 men with an average age of 72. These officers have been given a tall task to bend an institution designed to punish and sequester into a place that can provide care to some of the most vulnerable people in the system. In the end, they are proud of what they have built. Why else would they let a journalist come and see it? And still, the MDU seems to challenge several of the classic justifications for the prison system itself. To segregate the dangerous, for instance. Many MDU residents are weak and unthreatening. Or to reform the morally corrupt. Many MDU prisoners don't remember doing wrong. Amy Boncher, who was the warden of FMC Devens when I visited it in May, she's now the Bureau of Prisons Northeast Regional Director, told me that when she first met the residents of the unit, it was hard to make sense of the entire project. I looked at them and I'm thinking, why haven't we released all of them? Do you know history? It's the question an MDU resident posed when shuffling toward the writer here. I could only make out bits of his speech. Fidel Castro and revolution and United States took over Cuba. This man was born in Cuba and now spends his days reliving its past. As he moved closer, I noticed the smell. Since arriving at AMDU, he has generally refused to brush his teeth. I'm told that he's a big teddy bear, though he can get agitated if, say, another prisoner gets annoyed by his revolutionary babble and tells him that Fidel Castro was dead and that nobody liked him. When this happens, a staff member will play the man some old Cuban music, and he will weep as he listens to it. Most days, he doesn't seem to know why he's in prison, though sometimes he will allude to a past transgression. I was a young man, he will insist. I told them who did it. After a few minutes, an inmate companion named Oswaldo Ornelas put his arm around the Cuban man's shoulders and led him down the hallway. Mr. Ornelas is one of 4 cognitively healthy prisoners, men without dementia, who are trained to live and work in the MDU in exchange for $30 to $100 a month in wages and possibly time off their sentences. The companions are selected based on criminal history. They can't have been convicted of a sex crime or another violent crime. And temperament. You've got to make sure they won't take advantage of the men in any way, Mr. Doherty, the senior officer specialist, said. Mr. Ornelas told me that a few years ago, while incarcerated, he received a kidney transplant and that he wanted to work in the MDU to give my life back. When I arrived at the unit, Mr. Ornelas was on duty with another companion, Richard Lotito, and the 2 men had just spent 3 hours waking, showering, and dressing the other prisoners. In case you were wondering, what are they doing in exchange for time off their sentences? Yeah, it's not easy. Their work is physically demanding and exquisitely intimate. Several of the men needed help with toilets and wear diapers. Over many months, the companions have learned their individual needs and tempos. One guy poops every other day, another poops all day, Mr. Lotito said. Another gets confused and urinates in the trash cans. The key to this job is patience. Mr. Lotito and Mr. Ornelas were both released in July, it notes here. The MDU is made up of 2 long hallways that are lined with cells and several common rooms. Unlike standard prison units, the MDU has a kitchen filled with snacks because sometimes the men forget that they have just eaten and insist that they are starving. And then one of the companions can make them a peanut butter sandwich. Across most of the unit, the walls are painted a pale pink. In the world of dementia care, pink is sometimes thought to be a calming color that reduces combative behavior. 2 officers and 1 nurse are walking the floors at any given moment, but they do not carry guns, and they are not everywhere. Near the entryway, the prisoners' artwork is displayed on the wall: paper lanterns, painted tiles, flowers made of pipe cleaners. On the doors to the cells are pictures of favorite objects that help the men locate their rooms: a Cadillac, a Red Sox logo, an umbrella. Most of the time, the doors inside the unit are unlocked and the prisoners can come and go as they please. If the whole place weren't locked down and made of windowless concrete, it would almost look like a daycare center. During the day, there are activities: trivia with questions about events from the 50s and 60s, bocce ball, music therapy. Outside of scheduled time, the men are encouraged to be active. One folds laundry, one sits on the patio on a metal rocking chair and watches birds fly by. Another is given a paintbrush and a can of washable paint so that he can paint the walls all day because he gets upset when he's bored and doesn't know what to do with himself, Mr. Doherty said. As I was led around the unit, I heard screaming. I was told that the screaming man had suffered a brain injury and that he screams often, sometimes because of pain from the spots on his legs where he has rubbed the skin raw. Alexandra Kimball, an occupational therapist, rushed to his side. "Do you like Tom Brady?" she asked gently, referring to the former NFL quarterback. The screaming stopped. "I love Tom Brady." The staff members of the MDU maintain a binder with profiles of the prisoners, including information on how to soothe them. The binder entry for the screaming man advises officers to reference Tom Brady. And it works. Compared to officers in the rest of the prison, MDU staff members can exercise a bit more discretion when it comes to rule breaking. Ms. Boncher, the former warden, told me that the MDU has its own unique disciplinary procedures. Her staff members, she explained, are skilled at deciding which prisoners should be disciplined for bad behavior, which she says involves a psychological determination about whether the offending man knew that he was doing something wrong and did it anyway, and is therefore responsible and worthy of punishment, or was simply acting on impulse, a victim of his own damaged mind. This approach assumes that it is even possible to deduce the mental state of a man who only sometimes or partially understands himself. But sometimes the MDU residents will fight in the TV room, or someone will spit on someone else, or walk into the wrong cell and get punched in the face. In most cases, a man who acts out will be redirected to a new activity. In other cases, he will lose his commissary or phone privileges for a few days. In rarer cases, he will be locked alone in his room until he calms down, an approach that would not be used in a typical nursing home. A few men are only allowed out of their cells for 2 hours each day with supervision. This includes someone whom Mr. Doherty describes as absolutely the nicest of inmates until he starts hearing voices. Some of the men understand that they are being punished, and some don't, and some understand but then forget. All the prisons need this, Mr. Doherty told me, gesturing around him. What do other places do with these guys? On the day I visited the unit, a few of the medical staff members told me that they previously worked in community nursing homes, and that the MDU prisoners are probably receiving better care than they would on the outside in whatever Medicaid-subsidized beds they were likely to find themselves. Behind bars, the men have easy access to psychologists, social workers, and a pharmacist with a specialty in geriatrics. Perhaps that's true. And yet the existence of the MDU seems to impugn the basic logic of the carceral system, or at least its classic rationales. For some, the point of prison is chiefly to incapacitate dangerous people. The men inside the MDU vary in their physical abilities, but many are very sick and confused and use wheelchairs or walkers, and they probably couldn't hurt anyone if they wanted to. With them, appeals to public safety fall short. More broadly, the Department of Justice has concluded that aging inmates are generally less of a public safety threat, and researchers have found that recidivism rates drops to nearly zero for people over 65. For others, prison is meant to offer retribution for wrongdoing. In this view, if a person does something wrong, he deserves to be punished in proportion to his crime, and justice depends on it. Dementia tests this logic in different ways. Proponents of this view might decide that even a just act of punishment becomes unjust if the offender no longer understands why he's being condemned. Alternatively, they might conclude that those who are ailing and weak deserve mercy. Many of the MDU residents have already served several years of their sentences. Some believe that incarceration is an opportunity for rehabilitation. But with dementia, there is no rehabilitation, says Lynn Bayat-Gordon of the National Council of Certified Dementia Practitioners, the organization that provided training to MDU staff. Moral education is impossible for a person who cannot be educated, and a prisoner cannot reflect on his crimes and then maybe regret them or feel ashamed of them or be repulsed by them or resolve to do better in the future if he does not even remember them or feel responsible for them. Kelly Fricker, a psychologist at FMC Devens, told me that she can't do much in the way of talk therapy for her MDU patients. An inherent part of mental health therapy would be to remember from session to session. Many guys here don't even know who I am. But what if the point of imprisoning people for decades is to deter others from committing crimes? Arguably, this rationale survives. Letting the MDU prisoners go would, in this view, weaken the overall deterrent effect of criminal law. To hold this view, however, you would have to hold the unlikely belief that a person's decision to commit a crime would be affected by the knowledge that prisoners with advanced dementia are sometimes released from prison early. That's a long developing play, I would say, right? Well, eventually I'll get out when I'm 80 because, that's not much of a motivator, I don't think. Of course, dementia is not the only medical condition that casts doubt on the principles of incarceration. A prisoner who is very old but cognitively healthy might be similarly frail and unthreatening, or might have changed in drastic ways since his incarceration. A person with a severe mental illness might similarly forget his crimes, or feel psychically disconnected from them, or be incapable of thoughtfully reflecting on them later, but dementia might pose the paradigmatic challenge. Within the philosophical literature on cognitive impairment, there is a debate over whether a person with advanced dementia is even the same person as he was before it. If he cannot be considered the same person, then the men of the MDU are in important sense, being punished for someone else's crimes. At one point during my visit, I spoke with a white-haired man who had a large nose and reddish skin. "I want to go home like anything," he told me softly. "What brought you here?" I asked. "What brought me here?" The man paused. I don't know." As he walked away, Mr. Doherty shook his head, in case you think this is just an excuse. He remembers, he said. It was. Then he told me that the white-haired man had raped his granddaughter. Well, that'll reverse your view of things, right? Pretty quickly. Sometimes it just makes sense. Later, I wondered how much it should matter whether the old man remembered what he did. And what if he remembered sometimes, but not other times? Many people with dementia exist in a kind of middle ground of partial comprehension, or have memories that surface and then disappear. Well, we get into difficult metaphysical questions about personhood here, said Jeffrey Howard, a professor of political philosophy and public policy at the University College London. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on At Roots Radio. Shall we continue with this? This is a fascinating article. There's still a bit more to go here, but we're most of the way through it. I kind of had to cut off at that awkward part, but yes. And speaking to another aging expert, Jeffrey Howard, professor of political philosophy and public policy, not an aging expert, but rather misspoke there. This is an expert on the political philosophy of incarceration and public policy of incarceration. We get into difficult metaphysical questions about personhood when you're talking about prisoners with dementia. An expert at the University College London, yes, actual London, and this a conversation that they had when the writer told him about his conversation with the white-haired man. But you might think that there are two versions of the man. One of them deserves the punishment and the other doesn't. In order to punish the version of him that deserves it, you have to take along this hostage for the ride. It's hard to see how that sort of collateral damage could be justified, but sometimes you mention the crime, and that's enough for people, I would say. But it does pose an interesting dilemma. Does he know? Does he not know? And it seems like, interestingly, this different sort of prison official, somebody who's much more attuned to the individual needs of the various inmates, is more able to discern the reality of things. And maybe that's a good thing, and that's enough. Anyway, there is technically a way out. A few of the MDU's residents have received so-called compassionate release, which allows prisoners with extraordinary or compelling reasons, such as severe illness, to be released early from their sentences. The Federal Bureau of Prisons and most state systems have a version of it. But compassionate release, according to the 2022 American Bar Association report, is rarely used, and many prisoners die over the months it takes for their applications to be reviewed. Release is especially rare for people with dementia because the Bureau of Prisons has historically misinterpreted the federal statute to mean that only prisoners who are terminally ill and very close to death are eligible. State programs are also limited. Lily Paratori, the Director of Legal Services at Uncommon Law, which offers pro bono legal representation to incarcerated people in California, told me about representing a woman with Parkinson's disease and dementia who applied for medical parole. Parole board members looked at her client's memory gaps with suspicion, Ms. Paratori said. Your lack of memory appears to be selective, one commissioner said. The client was eventually released. Even people with dementia who do obtain early release can find themselves stuck in prison because they can't be released without a plan and there is nowhere else for them to go. Some have lost contact with family members. They don't have anyone on the outside who is able to provide or fund round-the-clock care, and nursing homes usually won't take them, particularly if they have violent histories, which some, but not all, of the MDU residents do. Some people get released, but we can't find them a spot, Christina Cosa, a social worker in the unit, said. Within the medical field, there has been very little research on how a history of violence might present itself in the context of dementia. Would a violent impulse be heightened or diminished as the brain it dwells in grows more impaired? Patricia Ruse, the clinical director at FMC Devens, does not believe that the men of the MDU pose a threat to anyone. They are probably better behaved than most patients in dementia units generally because a lot of them have spent many, many, many years in custody and so are rule followers. Dr. Ruse thinks it would be totally appropriate to release the whole unit on compassionate grounds and relocate the men to community nursing homes, which already have experience dealing with aggressive behaviors brought on by cognitive impairment and which cost much less than operating a prison unit. It doesn't make sense for our country to pay so much to house 15, 20 guys, Dr. Ruse said. Ms. Boncher, the former warden, is now equivocal. They've done some horrific things. They've been abusive to other humans. Collectively, the men of the MDU have murdered, attempted to murder, stabbed, kidnapped, extorted, swindled, and brought fear to entire cities. There were victims of these crimes, and some of them are still living. They will have their own opinions about the need or not for mercy. Within the MDU, staff members believe that the future of the correctional system lies in more MDUs. This is the future, one unit nurse told me. Have people from other institutions visited to learn about the model? I asked. Yes, Mr. Doherty said, and then he turned to his colleague. Didn't we have people from Guantanamo? Wow, that's some question. You're going to have people aging into dementia in place in Guantanamo, some of whom have already been there 20 years as it is. In the meantime, some researchers are proposing a more modest approach, building more dementia-friendly prisons, enclosed in quotes here. Such prisons might have cell doors painted in different colors to help confused inmates orient themselves, and handrails, non-slip floors, and accessible showers. They might guarantee that prisoners with dementia get bottom bunks and a bit more time to drop to the floor during drills. They might have pictures above the sinks to remind prisoners how hand washing works, and scheduled toileting for people who are incontinent. They might permit a person to wear Velcro clothing if he can no longer manage buttons or clasps. They could give him longer to finish his dinner. Dr. Ruse, the clinical director, is skeptical of all of it. In this country, we incarcerate way too many people for way too long. We give people life sentences, and then they turn 90, they're in diapers, they get demented. We have to ask ourselves, what are we accomplishing? Whatever we are currently accomplishing or mean to accomplish, it seems to require that America's prisons undergo a strange and maybe absurd conversion into something that more closely resembles a locked-down, fenced-off, barbed wire-enclosed nursing home. As I left the MDU, a man was moving slowly down the hallway in a wheelchair, his head wrapped in a thick bandage, because, I was told, he bangs his head on the concrete walls when he gets frustrated. In the common room, another man was helping the person beside him to open a plastic container holding his lunch, a hamburger. Another man sat to the side. Do you like it here? I asked him. Yeah, it's fine, he said, but I'd rather be in, what is it? Then he forgot where he wished he could go. That's an appropriate end to the article. It's a really fascinating thing to think about, and does pose some weird metaphysical questions, certainly, and public policy questions. Just thought I would throw that out there for your consideration and pondering over the weekend. One of several things that I thought were a little offbeat and worthy of consideration. The next one requires a bit of background. Something I didn't put aside initially when I first saw it, even though I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was the middle of the week, not going to be able to consider it. But here's the background that we might get to the story that I actually wanted to consider, but the background is fascinating all by itself you'll see. And I couldn't find I don't even remember where I originally saw the article, but it came in the context of some coverage of the newest Martin Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which I guess if you're familiar with the content, you say, oh, okay, I see where he's going with this one. If you're not familiar, well, then we can get you some familiarity. The article I decided to grab, which I thought might give us the background that we needed, both on the history of the real story and a little bit of context from the movie, and then allow us to move on to a one-off, is this piece from National Geographic. The writer's name is Aaron Blakemore, titled Murder, Greed, Conspiracy. What really happened in Osage County? Okay, that's the setting of the story and the film based on the story. And it starts out this way. Poison, jealousy, murder, ambition. Killers of the Flower Moon, Martin Scorsese's newest film, tells a story seemingly made for Hollywood. The tale of how white settlers used fatal means to seize the wealth of the Osage people of Oklahoma in the early 20th century. But the film, based on David Grann's best-selling 2017 book of the same name, isn't all fiction. You may have no background in this as I did, but it may be a very well-known story to you too. But what struck me when I first read about the background story was how easy it probably was for generations of white settlers, their descendants, etc., to dismiss the idea, and even in modern context, to dismiss the idea, oh yeah, right, sure, all this, the idea, well, I should give you the background first, and then we'll get to the other thoughts that I had about it. So, okay, we continue with the article. Born in very real, misguided federal policies and fueled by the outsized desire of white settlers to profit from Native Americans' land wealth. I mean, we've always known about the interest of white settlers in grabbing control of and owning what was then Native American land. And we have, that's been explained to no end. We all have that background, I think. Not everyone in America understands that, but we do, those of us listening to the show. Local greed resulted in the deaths of at least 60 wealthy Osage people. You got to know this story, and possibly many more. Here's what happened and why some are still left unresolved, and how the crime set the stage for modern law enforcement in the United States. All right? This is news to me. The wealth of the Osage. The Osage Nation came into massive wealth. Did you know that? After oil was discovered beneath its reservation in the 1890s, and you can already see where this is going to go, right? In the modern context, I guess, whenever there's any threat of Native Americans coming into great amounts of wealth, say because of the movement to establish casinos on tribal lands, others will swoop in and try, at least, in the modern context, the best they can do is grab control of it and grab the lion's share of the wealth for themselves, but they can't grab everything. But this is from back in the day when they could, essentially. So, the Osage Nation came into massive wealth after oil was discovered beneath its reservation in the 1890s, worth about $400 million annually in modern currency by the 1920s. Oil transformed the daily lives of the Osage people and turned them into what was then considered the richest nation on earth. Interesting. And now, well, why aren't they now? Well, because it was all stolen from them. And this is where I began to think, in the modern context, people saying, what? Come on, really? Seriously? Oh, they were the wealthiest nation on earth because they found oil underneath and they just happened to lose control of it. And what's the likelihood of a windfall like that, and a wild, savage, uncivilized tribe, in the view of bigots who tend to view everybody that's not living in Western style that way, just from out of nowhere finds out that they're now the wealthiest nation on earth because oil and and how ridiculous and how crazy. They probably wouldn't have known how to manage it. White settlers had to come in and they knew what to do with the oil and they would manage it for them. There's no reason why some obscure tribe living in some, parcel of reservation land somewhere would be able to manage this. It's crazy. And then, of course, what for a normal person, it would then strike you. Like you just told the story of Saudi Arabia, the tribal people living a relatively what Western bigots would describe as a primitive life. And then all of a sudden, boom, from out of nowhere, they find out they're sitting on enormous wealth and just money falls into their laps and they continue in their, to us, strange tribal ways, but just with enormous wealth. Well, actually, we have seen that story. But they weren't living on a parcel of land that American white settlers wanted to grab for themselves, except for the control of the oil. No one wanted the desert. But they did want Oklahoma, for whatever reason. And Oklahomans must know the reason. And so they said, all right, we can get control of this. Now, at the time, the story continues, prevalent attitudes held that Native Americans were naive, primitive, and in need of white oversight, lest they squander their wealth. The government also historically considered Indian tribes to be dependent nations in need of federal protection, promoting laws designed to, quote, protect, not empower, but protect Native people. And then maybe they didn't really protect them either. These laws often did not protect Native interests, and they instead served as ways for white settlers to seize and retain control over Native people and their ancestral lands. In 1887, for example, the Dawes Act broke tribal lands up and gave them to Native families with tribal claims willing to undergo cultural assimilation. However, the law also sold, quote, excess land to white settlers, dramatically reducing the amount of land owned by Native nations. The Osage Nation sidestepped this allotment system since it had bought 1.5 million acres of Oklahoma land outright from the federal government when the group was driven out of its ancestral lands in Kansas in 1872. But what an interesting development there. Driven out of Kansas, deposited in Oklahoma. We'll give them some worthless crap in Oklahoma. Oops, there's oil underneath it. Well, we better steal that too. The Osage Nation gave all the land to members, each receiving 657 acres. The nation itself held on to the mineral rights of the land, granting each member an inheritable head right to the share of the nation's mineral wealth. As the nation's oil brought in more and more money, each Osage was entitled to more wealth, drawing the interest, then the interference of non-Osage Oklahomans. Why can't we have this oil and money? It's not ours, but why can't we make it ours? We're white, and we control the legislatures. The Osage people's newfound wealth brought scrutiny to individuals' money management, and newspaper reports about chauffeured cars, mansions, and fancy clothing upset those who thought the Osage should spend their money more wisely. Cadillacs being driven through the desert until they ran out of gas and then abandoned. Spending billions of dollars to build a golf course in the desert. Oh, well, we should do something about that. We're not immune to trying to interfere with the way they run things there either, or trying to get a piece of the action, sometimes just by bombing them enough. Anyway, in 1908, in response to an outcry of protest over the Osage Nation's supposed inability to manage its money, Congress gave county probate courts in Oklahoma jurisdiction over land held by Native Americans who were deemed minors and incompetents by a judge. Gee, could we find a friendly judge? If a person was deemed incompetent, the probate court could appoint a white guardian to oversee their financial affairs and lease or sell their land. In 1921, Congress went even further to specify that any person with Osage blood under 21 years of age, you can write a law that says anything, in addition to anyone who was half or full Osage, must prove their competency or have a state court-appointed guardian assume management of their finances. How do you like that? You're affirmatively assumed to be incompetent unless you can come in and prove that you're not. What? Even the suspicion of irresponsibility was enough for the court to designate a white guardian with the right to disperse an Osage's money, charge them steep administrative fees, and pocket any funds above a threshold of $1,000 per quarter. As a result, writes historian Dennis McAuliffe, 600 guardians took $8 million in surplus funds alone, with no oversight and no accountability over the course of just 3 years. Wow. That's pretty amazing. The Osage murders began next, and we'll have to read through this. The stage had been set for financial abuse, and soon, murder. Beginning in 1921, a series of mysterious deaths began in Osage County. In May of 1921, the bodies of Anna Brown and her cousin Charles Whitehorn were discovered on the same day in different parts of the county. 2 months later, Brown's mother, Lizzie Kyle, who had inherited head rights, was killed by poisoning. Then Lizzie's nephew was killed in February of 1923. And on March 10th, Lizzie's daughter, her son-in-law, and a domestic worker died in a mysterious explosion at their home. The deaths sparked panic throughout Osage County and became known as a reign of terror. Meanwhile, the massive wealth of the Kyle family was inherited by the only survivors, Molly Kyle, a full-blooded Osage who was Lizzie's last remaining daughter, and her white husband, Ernest Burkhart. The Kyles weren't the only Osage people who died around this time, all under suspicious circumstances that included suspected poisonings, supposed suicides, and even being thrown off a train. Between 1921 and 1925, at least 60 Osage people were murdered or disappeared. All possessed wealth due to their head rights, and the Osage Tribal Council suspected that a prominent local white cattleman, William K. Hale, might be to blame. Hale, originally from Texas, was known for his exploitative financial dealings with Osage people and was of outsized influence in Osage County. He owned or partially controlled the bank, the local general store, the funeral home, he gets you coming and going, and even served as a reserve sheriff. Fantastic. Hale's nephew, Burkhart, was married to Molly Kyle, who had now inherited her family members' millions. Though the murders continued, local investigations and law enforcement efforts to solve the murders mysteriously failed. The Osage Tribal Council turned to the federal government for help solving the mystery of the murders. In response, the Bureau of Investigation, now known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, began an undercover investigation in the area. As the investigation began teasing out Hale's possible connections to the killings, more murders occurred. When Molly Kyle confessed to her priest that she thought she might be being poisoned, investigators cracked the case. Hale, it turned out, had pressured his nephew to marry Kyle, then engaged contract killers to murder her entire family. Under pressure from his uncle, Burkhart had been giving his wife poison-laced whiskey to drink. What could be worse? After a variety of state and federal trials that mesmerized the nation, briefly, I guess, with their dramatic proceedings and the murders of several potential witnesses, Hale and 2 accomplices were sentenced to life in prison, but many of the Osage murders remained unsolved. And now, killers of the Flower Moon as a section. Nor did the saga of the Osage Nation's wealth end with the killer's convictions. In 1925, Congress passed a law prohibiting non-Osage people from inheriting head rights owned by people with Osage or other Native American ancestry. That might sound like a good idea, actually. But complaints about the federal government's dealings with the Osage Nation's assets continued. In 2011, after decades of legal tussling, the U.S. government finally gave the Osage Nation a $380 million settlement and agreed to a variety of measures designed to better manage the Osage Nation's assets. Today, the Osage Nation murders are largely thought to have been the case that helped birth the FBI and modern law enforcement, which relies on extensive investigations, undercover operations, and the use of informants to crack complex criminal cases. Interesting. Right? Though the murders began over a century ago, they still echo in the lives and finances of the Osage people, and maybe more people than that. If we can get to the next story. Today, the Osage Nation notes on its website, approximately 26% of Osage head rights remain in non-Osage hands and can be passed on to non-Osage entities at will. Though the Killers of the Flower Moon looks at long past events, the nation writes, "We are not relics. The Osage Nation is thriving on our reservation in northeast Oklahoma, a people of strength, hope, and passion, honoring the stories of the past and building the world of the future." So, what impacts might there be down the line and in modern society? Well, here's where we get to the other story I was holding on to that didn't make quite as much sense unless we told this story first. And some of you, I guess, maybe have to be prepared to be somewhat disappointed, and someone you may know of. But here's an interesting modern-day story. Ever watched this on TV or read her recipes? The Pioneer Woman. In our house, we use her braised short rib recipe quite frequently, though she did always strike me as just a little bit odd. And I guess other people now think so too. Does the Pioneer Woman live on stolen Osage land depicted in Killers of the Flower Moon? Ask writers at the Oklahoman, Jana Hayes and Cheyenne Dirksen. Interesting question. Because she's got this fabulous home and is living this lifestyle, television lifestyle, et cetera, and you don't know where the money came from originally, but maybe you assume that she made it in doing all this fabulous cooking and developing a cooking show. Well, maybe not. The Pioneer Woman, Ree Drummond is her name, made the town of Pawhuska, Oklahoma famous through her farm lifestyle brand. It looks fabulous, right? What if it's all stolen? But a recent social media post about an upcoming film is drawing attention to the darker history of the Drummond family's land. The upcoming Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio film, Killers of the Flower Moon, is based on David Graham's bestseller, and has renewed interest in the Osage Reign of Terror, in which dozens of Osage people were murdered for their oil-rich land in the early 20th century. Amid the tumultuous time, the Drummond family began growing wealthy through Osage dealings and began amassing the property that placed them in the top 100 landowners in the country. Now, how the Pioneer Woman's family got their wealth and acquired so much Osage County land? Ree Drummond is married to Ladd, with two Ds, Ladd Drummond, who is the fourth generation of the family and is second cousins with Oklahoma Attorney General Getner Drummond. The Drummond family is the largest landholder in Osage County, reports Bloomberg, which produced a lengthy podcast based on interview recordings between biographer Terry Hammonds and Jack Drummond, who is one of the sons of the first Oklahoma Drummond, Frederick, who immigrated to the U.S. from Scotland in the 1880s. Now remember, just because they have immigrant heritage doesn't shield them from their wrongdoing, right? We don't want to, remember that from earlier in the show. It's not just Hispanic immigrants, who sometimes come from a rough and tumble background. In reviewing financial records, interview tapes, and government reports, Bloomberg determined that the Drummond patriarchs were able to amass so much land because they used money made off of or borrowed from the Osage. Bloomberg reported that the family also used business practices that bumped up against the line of what was considered legal, even for that time. And most of what was considered legal then ought not to have been. They were put in charge of Osage family's finances, borrowed from Osage estates, probated Osage wills, and collected on debts that they claimed as owners of a government-licensed store. According to Bloomberg, they bought headright fractions, even as they lobbied for the headright system to be abolished. And they bought land, lots of it, and pulled up the ladder behind them as well. The headright is, of course, the right to collect royalties of subsurface minerals. The headright system was created by the federal government to ensure the Osage received their fair share of money from the oil drilled on their allotted lands. And while land could be sold, a headright could only be passed eventually to the allotted Osage tribal members' legal heir, leading to the murders of many to obtain the deceased's headrights. Wow. So you're getting the picture here? Okay. Well, time for us to go, unfortunately, but a little bit more as we exit. In the early 1900s, the Drummonds operated a store where there was always a higher price for Osage. How do you like that? According to Bloomberg's interviews. They also acted as the undertakers. Remember that aspect of things? For many Osage people when they died, which also brought more money into the store. The Hominy Trading Company and other stores operated as undertakers, according to Bloomberg. The cost would be presented as a claim on the person's estate. Many times, the person responsible for vetting that claim was one of the Drummond brothers. They would be able to approve claims from their own store and collect a significant fee for doing so. And if you didn't have cash, we'll take headrights. However, I added that part, the ledgers available in public archives aren't detailed enough to compare individual transactions, and Getner Drummond says he's reviewed them and never seen any signs of exploitation. What do you know? He's come to that conclusion. In 1925, Jack Drummond bought half a headright from O.V. Pope, a white man who had inherited 1.5 of his Osage wife's 3 headrights for $20,000, basically, which is almost $340,000 today. 3 years later, he bought a quarter of a headright for $11,250. And you see how this begins to accumulate? We actually almost made it to the end of the article. You should take a look at it. I'll point you to it. But now, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and probably even more outrageous than just this.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Uh-oh, this doesn't look good. A MAGA hat gunman is in custody after opening fire on dozens of protesters in New Mexico over the installation of a conquistador statue. Actually, I understand this to be the second shooting related to this conquistador statue, about whom these MAGA people probably couldn't care less.